Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jong Kang. I'm the director of the Regional Cooperation Integration Division of the Economic Research and the Development Impact Department of Asian Development Bank. Welcome, everyone, to the Asian Impact webinar on unlocking the MSME potential amid the global trade uncertainty. I think everyone would agree that the SME is the backbone of the economic growth and activities, accounting for the significant portion of the GDP and economic growth and creating a lot of job opportunities for the people. We also cannot discuss the economic inclusion, economic inclusiveness issue without talking about MSME related issues, how to narrow the divide between the large and the MSME firms, and in terms of economic opportunity, business opportunities, apart from the narrowing the divide between the urban and the rural areas, and then how to narrow the income dispersions across different income classes within the country. But at the same time, I think we understand clearly how many challenges the MSMEs are having in terms of the navigating economic challenges, starting from the business startup, securing enough and sufficient capital and the finances to operate their businesses for their operations and to make the necessary investment. And also in terms of compliance costs between the large and MSMEs, even in the case of the free trade agreements, which can offer the very good opportunities to provide the preferential treatment. But in terms of the fixed cost nature of the compliance costs to comply with a lot of the requirements and criteria offered by FTA, I think that there are a lot of constraints and challenges MSMEs are facing at the moment. Likewise, equally challenging could be how the governments in the region can try to help address those challenges MSMEs are facing in terms of operating their businesses and navigating the global economic uncertainties and other types of challenges. I think in that context, ADB has been quite proactive in terms of providing the quite informative knowledge publication products. In particular, the SME Monitor, which was inaugurated back in 2020, has been our signature knowledge product to inform the policymakers, academia alike in the region in terms of how to improve the business environment for the MSMEs, and also in particular providing the down-to-earth, the practical data on the business environment as well as the SME development status across the region. Then the latest version of the SME Monitor was launched just last month, Baku in Azerbaijan. So this the webinar is very timely, building on the key messages, then a lot of the analytical pieces contained in that report. We are prepared to discuss more policy relevant issues around the ecosystem of the MSMEs in the region. Then I hope that we can have quite interesting discussion with the panelists during this session. So before we move on to the panel discussion, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Mr. Shigehiro Shinozaki. He is the main project officer of our signature knowledge product, which is again the SME Monitor for Asia and the Pacific region. Then he will be presenting the main the contents and the message of this year's SME Monitor for around 20 minutes, which will be followed by panel discussion with the esteemed panelist. You have the floor, Shige.
Thank you, John Wu, and good afternoon, and thank you very much for attending this webinar. So it's my great pleasure to present the key findings from this Asia SME Monitor 2025 edition. So please hold a minute. So I will upload my material first. Okay, so thank you very much for making the time today for attending this webinar. And so before starting, let me overview the macroeconomic conditions in developing Asia. So according to the latest Asian Development Outlook, developing Asia and the Pacific economies grew by a robust 5.1% in 2024, but growth rate is currently forecasted to slow to 4.8% in 2025 and 4.5% in 2026, likely is affected by the global trade uncertainty. The region's inflation moderated from 2.6% in 2024 to 1.7% in 2025, but it is forecast to increase to 2.1% in 2026, so largely due to trade uncertainty. The recent global trade environment confronts a multitude of issues, including continued uncertainty over the United States tariffs and trade tensions between the U.S. and the People's Republic of China, and Russia's war in Ukraine, and also geopolitical tensions in the Middle East. All this global uncertainty affects MSMEs, but differently by their country's economic size and growth policies. One key trend is that rapidly changing global economic environments will force governments to rethink their current MSME development strategies and policy approaches to maximize resilient and sustainable economic growth. Okay. Based on available data from 26 DMCs, developing member countries, MSMEs accounted for an average 99.8% of all enterprises, 67.6% of the workforce, and 38.7% of national economic output in developing Asia in 2024. As you see the left-hand side, MSMEs in developing Asia and the Pacific are massive in number and also continue to grow. However, the trends in this MSME landscape are different by region. For instance, in Southeast Asia, MSME landscape has shifted somewhat in line with this change in economic growth momentum. In 2024, the number of MSMEs dropped as large firms expanded in countries like Indonesia and Malaysia, suggesting that economic adjustments occurred along with this robust growth. Okay. MSME employment in Vietnam expanded, but its shares remained small, saying this 37.1% in 2023, suggesting more room for MSME job creation. Okay. And in developing Asia and the Pacific, roughly 72% of MSMEs worked in traditional services such as distributive trade. With 73% operating in rural areas. Innovative services-oriented MSMEs or technology-based startups, such as those using green technology and also digital tools, are only in a small fraction. MSME manufacturers are also very small, at an average 12% of MSMEs. They typically involve local handicrafts and small agribusiness and food processing. And sophisticated and modern product manufacturers are a very rare group. Okay. Although MSME sectoral coverage depends largely on this country's economic structure. All right, MSMEs in the region generate around 40% of national economic output, whether in GDP or gross value added. After the sharp drop in 2020 is affected by this COVID-19 pandemic, MSME contributions to economic output grew throughout the region. With Caucasus and Central Asia and Southeast Asia, contributing the most. Still, MSME output data are either unavailable or infrequently updated in several countries. Given that so many countries set the numeric targets of MSME contribution to GDP in their MSME development strategies, MSME output data should be strengthened to rightly monitor their contribution to this national economy. All right, while most MSMEs focus on the domestic markets, those involved in international trade have gradually increased across developing Asia. So based on available data from reporting countries, so MSMEs accounted for an average 40% of a country's total export value, so across the regions in 2024. But a rapidly changing global trade environment has differently affected this performance of MSME exports by country. For instance, Uzbekistan has the highest MSME export growth in 2024, so up by 25.1% due to the restructuring of its primary export markets. In the Kyrgyz Republic, so MSME exports contracted by 6.9% in 2023, so mainly due to sanctions against its main trading partner, Russia. And strengthens the controls on the re-export of dual-use goods from Europe and the US. Okay. All right, now let's move to MSME access to finance. And overall, MSME bank credit markets have expanded, so across developing Asia and the Pacific, supported by government and central banks' assistance to ease MSME access to finance. For instance, in 2024, for Caucasus and Central Asia, so MSME bank loans outstanding in local currency grew by 28% in Uzbekistan, followed by 20.2% growth in Kazakhstan, and 18.7% in Armenia, 17.7% in the Kyrgyz Republic, and 17.6% in Tajikistan. So also growing trend, so MSME credit market in developing Asia and the Pacific remained very small, indicating an average 16.9% of total bank lending, so equivalent to 10.7% of national GDP in 2024. And by sector, an average 53% of MSME loans went to those in services, followed by manufacturing 16% and agriculture 11%. So most Southeast Asian countries followed this pattern, but the sectoral distribution was very different by region and country. Okay. So MSME credit shares to total bank loans to national GDP and fluctuate depending on the level of exposure to shocks and also relevant to the government responses. Between 2020 and 2024, the average share of MSME loans to total bank loans dropped in 12 countries, while it expanded in 8 countries among Asia SME monitor countries. For instance, in Caucasus and Central Asia, overall MSME credit was likely attributed to these economic adjustments associated with this growth momentum and also government assistance. So leaving the two streams. Countries with gradually compressed MSME credit shares, such as Armenia and Azerbaijan, coinciding with credit expansion to large firms. And so those with expanding MSME credit shares, such as Uzbekistan, strengthening the state financing support through the Business Development Bank, so established in September 2023, for instance. Okay. All right. So the share of non-performing loans, NPLs, to total MSME bank loans dropped across the regions after an 8.7% pandemic surge in 2020. So moderating to an average 7.0% in 2023. So however, it rose again to 7.6% in 2024 as the MSME bank credit market expanded across the region. So compared to the gross bank lending NPL ratios, MSME NPLs are generally higher, and MSME NPL ratios exceeded gross bank NPL ratios in Asia SME monitor countries, except Tajikistan and Kazakhstan. Okay. All right. So the role of public financing and credit guarantees is critical in enhancing MSME access to finance. So with the slowing global economy, several countries likely squeezed MSME subsidized loans. Instead, credit guarantees were more widely used as credit enhancements for MSME financing in developing Asia and the Pacific. They typically offer partial guarantees and also portfolio guarantees. So MSME credit guarantee markets have developed and also grown modestly across the regions, especially in Southeast Asia and India. Okay. So various non-bank finance institutions, NBFIs, operate nationally, primarily led by microfinance institutions and credit cooperatives and finance companies and pawn shops. So MSMEs often raise small amounts from NBFIs for working capital, but the non-bank finance market has yet to adequately supplement the bank lending to MSMEs in the region. The share of NBFI financing to GDP was the largest in Cambodia, at 12.2% in 2024. With a rest below just 10%. Okay. So between 2020 and 2024, the share of non-performing financing, NPF to total NBFIs financing, dropped in most countries except Bangladesh, Cambodia, and Nepal. But a relatively high NPF, non-performing financing in 2024, saying that for instance, 33.8% in Bangladesh and 13.9% in Azerbaijan and 11.3% in Sri Lanka. So it remains a very much problematic problem for developing this NBFI industry in the region. So capital markets provide another alternative financing option for qualified MSMEs. Since 2017, many countries have created a dedicated equity market for MSMEs, such as SME platforms in Bangladesh, acceleration board in Indonesia, alternative board in Kazakhstan, and also LIBEX board in Thailand. MSME equity markets have been expanding, but remain small in developing Asia, mostly around 2% or less for market capitalization to GDP. Except Vietnam's APCOM market, showing 14% in 2024. Okay. So this is a list of policies and regulations relevant to MSME development and financial inclusion for 26 countries. So MSME development policies are very important elements of the long-term national development strategies across the region. A well-designed MSME policy framework and its effective implementation will create a basis for domestic-led economic growth that is resilient against global economic uncertainties or external shocks. Okay. So in particular, smaller economies in the region need to plan more inclusive, sustainable economic growth strategies that address both domestic and global market development to explore more private sector-led growth opportunities. And financial inclusion strategy is a very critical part of nationally inclusive growth strategies, which most observed countries have already implemented. Okay, I skip this. Okay, so based on this findings from this Asia SME Monitor 2025, 7 policy implications could be raised when designing effective MSME development strategies under current circumstances. So number 1, strengthen support for manufacturing MSMEs, technology-based startups, and entrepreneurs to build a domestic-led base for economic growth that increases MSME productivity. So just given that traditional services dominate MSME business, more balanced development across these economic sectors will ensure MSMEs can contribute to more resilient, sustainable national growth amid global uncertainty. Okay. And then number two, further promote business digitalization, narrowing the digital divide among MSMEs through strengthened digital literacy programs. The use of digital tools is indispensable. So in innovative businesses, so most MSMEs focus actually domestically. So with many operating in the rural areas and also preferring the cash transactions. So this must be changed. So if they want to grow, so the digital divide among MSMEs is a very critical barrier to promoting business digitalization. So governments should continue strengthening their digital business literacy programs for entrepreneurs and small business owners and managers, especially in rural areas. Okay, and then number three, support international trade of MSMEs through regulatory reforms and policy assistance to help avoid these unfavorable impacts from recent global trade uncertainty. The historically high United States tariffs will likely have a large impact on Asian exporters, including MSMEs, especially small subcontractors working for large enterprises. So governments should be proactive in easing any unfavorable effects on this business environment by implementing needed regulatory reforms and also applying the appropriate policy support, such as the expanding trade finance, enhancing the awareness of the concessions available from various trade agreements, and also facilitating cross-border and behind-the-border procedures like that. And then number four, improve and develop credit guarantee markets to help MSME borrow more easily. And rethink how to promote green lending to those developing more environmentally sound products. As a credit enhancement tool for MSMEs, the credit guarantee industries has gradually expanded. Already I mentioned, across the region, but they remain very small. So in most countries, traditional credit guarantees typically offer partial guarantees coverage, but it does not cover all credit risks given these constraints in available resources. So with this in mind, an optimal credit guarantee ratio, determining the optimal level of guaranteed loans to MSMEs is worth considering. So ideally incorporating factors such as greenhouse gas emissions, in designing credit guarantee options to respond to climate change. Okay. And number five, create and promote growth capital financing venues for MSMEs, by developing a national venture capital industry and also promoting R&D, research and development investments to help small firms innovative. So MSME equity markets have become alternative growth capital financing venues for eligible MSMEs in developing Asia, attracting the individual investors. The venture capital industry is in a very infant stage of the development in developing Asia, but there was a potential to expand this investor base for MSME markets, by attracting venture capital companies into MSME equity markets. In particular, innovative small manufacturers, technology-based startups, and also entrepreneurs can be potentially valuable investment targets in these markets. Increasing the number of the incubators and the accelerators would be critical to foster national MSME entrepreneurs. Promoting R&D investments to innovative small firms may also attract venture capital funding. And then number six, just quickly, develop a quality job market and registration system for MSMEs. Encouraging them to formalize their business and also employees by strengthening these business advisory and training programs for MSME owners and managers. Informal businesses So employing casual workers remains a very critical issue for sound MSME and labor market development across the region. So particularly pronounced in the Pacific. So governments need to provide incentives for MSMEs to formalize and also register their workers. So once business development services and also tailor-made training programs should be strengthened. And the last one, okay, create a conducive business environment for women-led MSMEs and also young entrepreneurs through some more focused financial assistance and also skills development support. So our observed countries in this Asia SME monitor already have policy assistance measures for women-led MSMEs. So drawing young and female entrepreneurs into national gender mainstreaming strategies. So conducting also capacity building programs and providing network support and financial assistance. So this should be strengthened further using an evidence-based approach. Okay, so that's 7 points. So we found from the Asia SME monitor. Okay, just quickly. All right, so for your reference, this is the summary of MSME's landscape indicators I mentioned. And also this one is also the summary of MSME access to finance indicators in the region. So please take a look later. All right. So for more details, please visit our website indicated here. So to download the latest edition of this Asia SME monitor and also database. So, okay, so I will stop here. So thank you so much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Shiga. Thank you very much for your concise yet comprehensive coverage of the key issues and messages included in the SME Monitor 2025. With that, I think we are ready to have a panel discussion, and then I'm very pleased to be joined by 4 experts in this area. Let me introduce briefly each one of them. So Ms. Aigul, the Umurzakova is the principal expert of the DAMU Entrepreneurship Development Fund of the Kazakhstan. And then the Ms. Tina Rohner is the senior investment specialist of ADB's, the private sector operation department. And then the Ms. Hanna Bucher is the senior public sector specialist on the specializing in the trade industry at the sector department of the Asian Development Bank. And the last but not least, Mr. Khagani. Karimov is the senior economics officer of the Azerbaijan Resident Mission from the Asian Development Bank. I think we have already got several questions posted in the Q&A box, but before I open the floor to entertain some of the questions from the audience, let me go around the table to ask some specific questions to each and every panelist joining this session. First, my question is for the Ms. Aigul, and one of the key themes of this year's SME Monitor 2025 is the potential negative impact of the heightened global trade uncertainties, and that how much SMEs in the region are feeling the negative impact from this changing and negative impact from the heightened trade uncertainty. In some cases, instead of the higher tariff level themselves, the uncertainty themselves can pose another additional threat, and even the greater the degree of the risks and for the business, in particular for the SMEs. So from your observation and your discussion and conversation with the MSME, the business people in your country or across the region, do you think that the impact of heightened global trade uncertainty is already felt by the MSMEs in your country or the regions? Thanks.
Hello, I'm very pleased to join this webinar. And talking about trade uncertainty, in Kazakhstan, the actual direct impact of tariffs is pretty minimal because tariffs are pretty contained in Kazakhstan. Our Kazakhstani exports are on the exemption list. But talking about the indirect impact of tariffs on, for instance, small and medium enterprises, it's pretty significant, can be pretty significant. First of all, because trade uncertainty creates some major disruptions, for instance, macroeconomic instability, which can cause some currency volatility. And this can directly affect entrepreneurs because, for instance, the input prices can go up, and that's why it would be very expensive for them to import goods and services from abroad because of currency volatility, because of those tariffs. And it is just one of the indirect effect of tariffs on small and medium enterprises. And I think this can directly negatively affect them, and that's why they would have face some problems with access to credit. And as you know, as you have already mentioned, access to finance is a huge problem to many entrepreneurs. Back to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, I agree with you that although there may not be an immediate significant negative impact caused to the business from the tariff uncertainties, but there could be second round, third round negative impact coming from the higher input cost, imports of intermediate goods, and also many SMEs being the subcontractor of the larger firms. Whenever there is the impact, the inflict on the larger firm, there could be another round of the secondary impact being felt by the SMEs in the future. So we need to be staying vigilant to those kind of the potential negative spillover impact in the future. So with that, I'd like to move on to our next speaker. So my question now is for the Khagani, my colleague from the Azerbaijan Resolution Mission. So in a broad sense, in a broad perspective, from the broad perspective, what could be the key challenges of the resilient and sustainable MSME development in your country, in particular, because you are supporting the Azerbaijan from ADB side?
Thank you very much for invitation for this webinar. As you rightly mentioned at the beginning, that SME is a backbone of any dynamic economy. And in Azerbaijan, it's also we see that SMEs are important for diversification of the economy. We do know that Azerbaijan is a commodity-dependent country. That's why the development of SME sector is very important. But still, we see that there are some certain constraints which are interrelated, and they create some challenges for the development of these sectors. First of all, I think it's not only a challenge in Azerbaijan, it's also in other countries also access to finance. This is the most significant challenges. So what we see is that banks remain risk averse. They don't provide much of finance, especially in regions without the collateral. Also, there are not much tailored financial instruments for small and medium enterprises. Also, we see the next challenge is that about capacity and literacy also in the sector. There is a certain capacity that they should be exist. This is a literacy in management, marketing, quality standards, and certain literacy needed for supply chain integrations. And we see that is a challenge for this sector. Also, considering the current market requirements, we see that there are some limited digital adaptations in the country. It's true that Azerbaijan has a strongly governed foundations and promising ICT infrastructure. But if you go to the regions and you see the outside the capital city, you see that there is a lag in e-commerce, and they don't use much of digital solutions, which is important for this sector, considering the especially AI era. Also, there are some climate-related things like, for example, in Azerbaijan, 70% of the water resources are cross-border waters, which is important for the agriculture sector. If you go to the regions, this water scarcity is a problem. And why I mention this, because sometimes we see that these weather events can feed with the small firms if there is no measures taken into consideration. So what we can do with these challenges, I believe that governments can take certain steps that will support it. They can expand and diversify access to finance. They can use a different guarantee mechanism. There already exist some guarantee mechanisms, funds supporting MSMEs. But the thing is that it should be expanded. Also, I believe that there should be some risk sharing support to banks to improve the risk sharing. And maybe government can use some non-bank channels, maybe leasing, maybe some sector-led approaches should be used. Also, most important for startups, venture and angel financing should be used for the MSMEs. Also, I believe that business development services should be developed. I think like in Azerbaijan, we have one-stop advisory services is existing, and there is a SME centers. I believe the government should support them and create some linkages between startups and the corporate sectors and MSMEs. MSMEs shouldn't be only supporters; they should be created some linkages. Also, but the last one, but not least one, sustainability and resilience should be main support from the government because there should be some sector-specific roadmap in agribusiness, tourism, and creative industry. So I believe that there are some certain structural challenges that cannot be solved overnight. It can be like depending on commodity. There should be some information system database provided for SME sectors that banks can use, but they cannot. This structural challenge cannot be used solved overnight. I believe that long-term investment and better data systems can support to solve these challenges. So I believe that in Azerbaijan, if we get this right, and this sector, MSMEs, will not only create jobs and economic growth, but they will build more resilient, more inclusive, and a sustainable future for the economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Khagani. So you have covered the whole ecosystem to support SME development, starting from the support for the business startup, and also the support for the SMEs supply chain participation, and also how to better serve their purpose on the sustainability agenda, and last but not least, how to better enhance the access to finance for the SMEs. On that, the last point, this is a good segue for the next question to Tina, my colleague from our PSOD. So also there are a couple of questions in the Q&A box about how to improve the access to finance for the MSMEs, and also in particular in the context of rising NPL ratios of the many SMEs in the region. So, would you like to share your views on how to improve the access to the finance for the SMEs? Thanks.
Yeah, sure. So I work, of course, in PSOD, and I am based in Tbilisi and cover the wider Central West region. And for us, we provide several things that can benefit MSMEs. Firstly, of course, is that we provide long-term credit lines to banks and microfinance institutions. One of the key challenges here as well is access to local currency finance often. So IFIs, including ADB, are able to raise local currency finance in many markets. And that is one key value add that we bring, given that in many markets, MSMEs have their income in local currency. But if they keep borrowing in US dollars or other hard currency, then there's a mismatch, and this can have quite bad consequences if you have very sharp currency moves. So, we try to do local currency lending as much as we can. And then, of course, we also provide technical assistance. To the banks, of course, and the microfinance institutions that we work with. But of course, this technical assistance often targets also the end borrowers, the MSMEs. So for example, in Georgia, with some banks here, we set up an academy where MSMEs could come and discuss a number of topics, right, that are important for their business, because many entrepreneurs who run small businesses may not be so sophisticated in all kinds of ways, whether it comes to digital or even just like accounting, preparing financial statements, which again will increase their access to finance if they become more literate in these areas. So with our transactions, we always try to, of course, provide the long-term financing that is needed at rates that are, commercial still, but, it's often attractive as well to the borrowers. And as well partner it with this kind of technical assistance where, of course, we train banks in different areas, but also often end borrowers are also considered through different trainings and other initiatives. Then, we also have, of course, the trade and supply chain finance team that provides another type of financing that addresses more risk sharing and short-term liquidity as well, which is very valuable. And, on the MSME side, we can, of course, also look at risk sharing facilities, which, help the sub-targets and the MSMEs and the sub-borrowers to borrow more, to be more enabled to be borrowing, right? So there are different areas that we can target, but of course, from my point of view, often technical assistance is also quite key, especially when we can have trainings and other access to the end borrowers. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. So ADB's, the trade finance, supply chain finance should be very influential tools to support SMEs access to the international trade opportunities. And at the same time, you have rightly mentioned that not only providing the long-term financing opportunities, but also strengthening the overall financial infrastructure to better support the MSMEs' needs for the financing opportunities. That would be very much important agenda going forward. With that, I'd like to move on to our next speaker, the Hanna. So my question for you is that in a broad sense, what could be the role of the international community and in particular the international organization like the ADB in supporting MSME, the ecosystem, and the nurture the business environment for the MSMEs going forward? Yeah, Hanna.
Thanks very much. Yeah, so I've worked in a couple of different organizations on this topic of SME development and trade. So maybe just to give you my 2 cents on where I see, I guess, the most value that international organizations and MDBs can bring in this, a few points. So the first one, I think, is in helping policymakers make better informed decisions. So, and we've heard this, like, despite the importance of SMEs, and I think a lot of us and a lot of policymakers as well, partner policymakers, are aware of this. But we've heard from Shigehiro's presentation as well, right, that the availability and the quality of data on SMEs, it varies a lot between different countries. And this gap in a lot of places when it comes to good data is a problem. And where, especially in this sort of environment like today, where there's a lot of uncertainty, it undermines our ability to design effective policies or to decide the right reform actions. So I actually see this as a very important area where international organizations can help and to support in collecting, but also analyzing data and providing that as a good evidence base for policymakers to then make well-founded decisions. So that's really key. And I think now, of course, the Asia SME Monitor is a great example of this. The second point, and I think it's related to the question of data, is to raise the voice of SMEs with decision makers. Now, it's not, it's quite common across the globe that it's largely large businesses in particular that tend to have the ear of decision makers. For good reasons, that SMEs often are informal, they're not organized, and so on. Now, if you take the case of, say, a trade policy, any sort of trade negotiator will tell you that negotiations really begin at home, right? In understanding the interests of your own businesses and of your own stakeholders. Now, if that SME voice is missing and your trade policies then, of course, are at risk of being lopsided and potentially even risk not benefiting the 90% of enterprises in your country. So really raising that voice of SMEs in policymaking is very important. And I think international organizations can really help there. A third point, I think, is the topic of inclusion. It was also mentioned in Shigehiro's presentation on, for example, women-owned enterprises. I mean, it's a bit sad that this continues to be an issue, but that it's still true that women-owned enterprises, on average, they tend to be more likely to be informal. They tend to export less than male-owned companies, and also receive less financing than male counterparts. And this, of course, hinders women-owned enterprises from growing. And so here, I also think international organizations can help. And there are different ways that this can be addressed. Just to give you one example from our programs, we have some programs in the Pacific where through simplifying, say, tax policies and improving the administrative efficiency of these processes, we've managed to reduce the barriers for women entrepreneurs to formalize, and through that to also access finance and services. And maybe just the last point before I hand back. I think international organizations can also play a really important role when it comes to regional integration and building trust. And it's partly the convening power, but also because MDBs like ADB, for example, they built up a record in the region as a neutral broker. And that's important when it comes to facilitating policy dialogue, finding also interoperable standards, regional responses to crisis. And all of this can help reduce fragmentation and really build trust and some predictability in an environment right now that can really use them, I would say. Maybe that's enough from my side. I'll hand back to you.
Okay, thanks, Hanna. Yeah, so there are a lot of things that can be done by the international organizations like the ADB and by the international community to advocate the underrepresented voices of MSMEs and also try to nudge better policy intervention by the governments across the region. With that, I'd like to pick up a couple of questions from the Q&A box. First question I'd like to pick up is the one question specifically on the digitalization, and then the question is, what are the main challenges for the MSMEs transfer domestic to global with the business digitalization due to current online scam cases? So I think the question can be posed to the Aigul from the Damu of the Kazakhstan. So what kind of opportunities are there for MSMEs to embrace the opportunities offered by the business digitalization, and how much as MSMEs are doing well in terms of the embracing this the opportunities and the potential gains from digitalization? Yeah, over to you, Aigul.
Okay, thank you. In Kazakhstan, we have lots of cases and like best practices related to digitalization. Recently, Kazakhstan has been making strides in improving the digital landscape. For instance, in 2024, Astana Hub attracted more than 177 million US dollars for their like some ventures related to AI and IT. And apart from Astana Hub, there exists like e-governance, which is called eGov, where you can get government services online, and so it's pretty handy and like helpful. And also, electronic penetration in Kazakhstan has rapidly been increasing, and it's already reaching global levels. Like it's more than 15%. So many entrepreneurs in Kazakhstan use digital tools. And for instance, we have lots of resources like Choco or Aviata, all of those services where you can just get any services online. And apart from that, I want to mention Astana International Financial Center, which is also doing lots of job related to digitalization. And in addition, like about deals, like venture deals, in Kazakhstan, we have reached like 87 million US dollars in deals related to venture deals. And I think in Kazakhstan, the pace of digitalization is very good and up to global standards. And we're like doing lots of work related to that. Back to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Aigul. Yeah. So whenever I travel to Central Asia, I can see the vibrant, dynamic evolution of digitalization in the region. Yeah, that very tech-savvy business startups and entrepreneurs looming on the horizon in the region. So I think that the future prospect is very bright on that front. I've seen one quite controversial question from the Q&A box, which is some challenges, quite significant challenge coming from the reshoring motives coming from the outside of region. as many countries, in particular led by US, are trying to push for the reshoring activities, which could pose increasing the challenges to the businesses in the region. So my question is for the Hanna. So this kind of challenge coming from outside the region, at the same time, the strength and the motivation and the rationale to promote the regional cooperation, international trade, and in the region and beyond. So from your perspective, what kind of regulatory reforms and policy assistance do you think could be helping to avoid the unfavorable impact from this kind of reshoring or the trade uncertainty coming out of the region?
Thanks. I mean, I think it's an interesting question also because it's an interesting time in general to work on trade because, you know, we're experiencing this big shock to the world trade system. At the same time, at least, you know, in the region, Asia-Pacific region, if you look, there's also been this flurry of trade agreements that are being initiated or being completed now. We've seen this, I mean, it's, of course, countries are looking to diversify their export market, the natural reaction, right? You're looking to see what else we can do facing this situation. So we've seen this through new membership applications, for example, with RCEP or with CPTPP, as well as bilateral trade agreements. So in terms of what we could do, right? So coming to the second part of your questions of, you know, the regional, the regulatory reforms or also policy assistance in this area. I mean, looking at the Asia-Pacific region, that we already have over 200 trade agreements, I think, in force. So while, you know, in some instances, I do think new trade agreements can be strategic and important, I feel, but almost the more decisive or a more important action right now would be the utilization of the existing agreements or the deepening of those existing agreements. And so what does that mean, right? So that means actually addressing non-tariff barriers in instances where maybe the tariffs are already quite low. What is it that's keeping companies from taking advantage of those existing trade agreements regionally? And, you know, if you look at that, you know, in more detail, very often things like rules of origin are very regularly cited as barriers for exporters, or things like compliance with technical standards or health and safety standards. So there are a lot of things. And I think this is maybe the positive message to take from all of this is that there's so much that can be done, I think, within the region where we don't, that is sort of within our control that would allow us to deepen and to strengthen trade relations regionally. And I mentioned that non-tariff barriers, but also trade facilitation measures, of course, very important. And I think there's still a lot of room for that. I think there's one aspect that I agree that maybe that came a bit out in that comment, which is we do have to, it comes with a lot of challenges, of course, as well, because, you know, in a lot of export baskets of our countries, they often look quite similar. And so in many instances, we are in competition with one another. So if there's one more point I want to make is that we really have to focus on diversification and on value addition. And that really has to be at the forefront, I think, for a lot of countries going forward. Maybe I leave it there for now. Thanks.
Yeah, okay, thanks. So the Hanna has also alluded to the importance of the regional cooperation. So my question to the Khagani is that how much regional cooperation can help the SMEs to be part of the benefits of the regional cooperation at the Kharag level and the other part of the region here?
Thank you very much. Right now, we see that in general, if you look, global uncertainty distracts supply chains, tightens financial markets, and raises trade costs. But besides that, I think that from the perspective of MSME, we need to increase this regional cooperation because this sector needs tools, they need to grow, they need to export, and they need to become resilient. For example, if from perspective of Azerbaijan, I can say that Azerbaijan is in the middle of the Central Asia and Europe. For Azerbaijan, for the SME sector, it's very important to improve these routes, transport lanes, which will help them the sector to develop, and they will create some for small firms which has a lack of information. They will support them. Also, this will create some platform for them to build this regional cooperation with outside of the country, because export is very important for diversification. Also, I think that how to say, these MSMEs don't have enough information. Sometimes they don't have letter of credits, for example. It's important for them guarantees. These regional corporations helps them to promote them to get information, reduce the risks of the banks, and it helps to unlock new liquidity sources. Also, I think the regional corporations shouldn't stop, even if there is an uncertainty in the market. It affects a different country differently, exports and imports. That it should be continued. They can be like trust a custom processing. Maybe it should improve electronic certificates, coordinated border management. For example, in Azerbaijan example, I can say that Azerbaijan has an e-custom single window system and they're developing free economic zone. So all of these regional corporations brings these values to country to find the new sources of diversification and increase relationship, especially with the close neighbors. So for me, I think that regional cooperation is not optional. It shouldn't be an option. It should be like essential. So countries with their neighbors, maybe far neighbors, they should always continue to improve the connection between just the different MSMEs, different corporates, different countries.
Okay. Okay, thanks. So before we wrap this session, Tina, would you have any final word for 1 minute to share with the audience about the importance of how to nurture the business enabling environment from the private sector development perspective for the MSMEs?
Yes, sure. I mean, in conclusion, I think we've heard so many great ideas today, and I think it's just very important that we focus on the end clients that we have in ADB, which often are the small and medium-sized borrowers as well as individual entrepreneurs, and that we enable them as much as possible, both through financing, but also through technical assistance and also further upstream initiatives that in the end will trickle down to them. So, I mean, I think, it's always good to have both the big picture in mind, but then also, on the ground, when you go and meet the people that in the end are really supposed to benefit from this development, you can also see the real challenges that they face. And we always have to sort of keep that reality check in mind as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Tina. So I think there are a lot of issues to tackle and touch upon in discussing how to improve the business environment for the MSMEs, what kind of policy measures should be taken by the policymaker in the region, and what kind of international efforts can be further made by the international community and other international organizations going forward. I hope today's discussion has provided some useful food for thought going forward for the policymakers and academia alike in the region. I'd like to appreciate all the valuable contributions made by the 4 esteemed panelists for this session. Thank you very much for your contribution and participation. And before we close today's webinar, we would like to invite you to join our next Asia Impact webinar, which is on the decarbonizing ASEAN. Hard to abate sectors, finance, tech, and policy, to be held on the 12th of February, 2026, Thursday at 2 p.m. Manila time, online via Zoom. Please do check out the Asian Impact Webinar webpage and the Chief Economist X account for more updates. Thank you very much and see you again. Bye.